Happy Easter to you, and what a glorious day as Easter should be. Easter is meant for sunshine, angels, miracles, magic bunnies, maybe even chocolate. It's the perfect day, isn't it? And we dress the part, don't we? Cleaning up the best we can. Do you remember when Easter meant a new outfit, maybe a haircut, and certainly some extra scrubbing behind the ears? In some churches, even the cross gets spiffed up, covered with flowers. That's a tradition I love. Everything must be polished and beautiful for Easter, the most important day of the entire Christian year, don't you know? But all that glowing perfection is a far cry from how things were on the very first Easter. Listen to how Luke tells the story, chapter 24. From the testimony of the first people on the scene of the resurrection. They were the women who followed Jesus faithfully, even after his death, taking on the task of tending to his body as soon as they could. And so, on the first day of the week at early dawn, they came to the tomb, taking the spices that they had prepared. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they went in, they did not find the body. While they were perplexed about this, suddenly 2 men in dazzling clothes stood beside them. The women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground. But the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, but has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be handed over to sinners and be crucified, and on the third day rise again." Then they remembered his words, and returning from the tomb, they told all this to the 11 and to all the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women with them who told this to the apostles. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. But Peter got up and ran to the tomb. Stooping and looking in, he saw the linen cloths by themselves. Then he went home, amazed at what had happened. And that was the first Easter. It was a day of great triumph for God, but great failure for the disciples. I wonder if Peter stood there looking into the dark emptiness and contemplated the various ways he had failed. There were many, like that time he tried to walk across the water to follow Jesus, only to sink like a rock. And every time he spoke, he seemed to say the wrong thing, even contradicting Jesus when Jesus was telling them about the whole crucifixion and resurrection. And then when that whole horrible time did come, Peter had failed to protect Jesus, who had asked them to stay awake and watch while he prayed through the night. Peter, who used to stay up all night fishing, fell asleep on the most important job he'd ever been given. It was on his watch that Jesus was arrested. And then while Jesus was being interrogated and beaten, Peter slunk around, watching from a safe distance, even warming himself by a fire while pretending he had nothing to do with Jesus. 3 times he denied knowing his beloved teacher and friend. And after all that, Peter had even failed to believe the most sincere women he'd ever known, the ones who had followed Jesus all the way to the cross and to the tomb. No amount of spit polish could clean up Peter's conscience. Deep down, he knew he was a failed disciple. Should have known it from the moment he tried to walk on the water and sank like a rock. And yet he was still the rock upon which Jesus would build the church. In his book, Gifts of the Dark Wood, the Reverend Dr. Eric Elms writes, "If Peter's attempt to walk on water signals the character of the community Jesus sought to build, then it would most certainly be adventurous, daring, responsive to Jesus' call, and somewhat prone to failure. One might even surmise that Jesus considered right failure to be at least as important as right belief or right action." You see, Peter's failures shaped him into the leader Jesus needed him to be. Failing to walk on water taught him to try hard things and accept what was his to do and what wasn't. Not everyone can walk on water, and those who can't must figure out other ways to cross. Peter's awkward tendency to blurt out the first thing that came to his mind, and Jesus' response to that behavior, taught him to consider his words more carefully. Even the denials, all three, taught him something, because never again in his life would Peter refuse to speak truth, cost what it may. I wonder if Jesus chose Peter specifically because he was capable of failing and of learning from failure. If we think back to the day Jesus called Peter to follow him, according to Luke's Gospel in chapter 5, that was the day Peter had failed to catch a single fish. Now Jesus told him, go out again, cast the net on the other side of the boat. Really? A carpenter giving fishing advice to a professional fisherman? But Peter gamely did what Jesus said, even though it went against all the conventional wisdom he had been taught by master fishermen. And guess what? They caught so many fish the nets were bursting. And that's when Jesus called Peter to leave the boat and follow him. I don't think it was because he'd finally caught some fish. I think it was because he had been willing to try something new. Jesus' mission required helpers who could try new things, even at the risk of failure. Now, through the rose-tinted glasses of nostalgia, it's easy to imagine that Jesus' first disciples were probably perfect. I mean, they had been handpicked by Jesus. How could we ever live up to the standard he must have used in drafting his team? But it turns out the only thing those people did perfectly was fail. Over and over again. They failed to understand, they failed to heal the sick, they failed to listen to Jesus, they failed to listen to each other. Some even failed to recognize Jesus when he came back. But through every failure, they learned the art of failing better. And that was the secret to their success over time. Because God can use any human failure to accomplish God's purposes, no matter how great the failure, if we can learn from it. The cross itself is really a giant symbol of failure. Did you know that? The cross was designed by the Romans to humiliate those they deemed enemies, to show everyone what would happen if they challenged the authority of the empire. The brutality of the cross was a warning. You can try to resist, but you will fail. Empire always wins. But little did the empire know, the cross was a sign of their own failure. They had failed to create a just society where everyone could thrive. They failed because creating a just society had never been their goal, and their total lack of empathy for humankind was their biggest failure. No amount of imperial majesty or military might could fill the hollowness of such a nation which, for all its wealth and power, lacked the most essential thing, a heart. And it would take a humble king, one with no real estate, no wealth, no crown, to reveal the failure of that empire, not by taking it down, but by rising up from the lowest place they could send him, the grave. Jesus' resurrection would challenge the long-held definition of success, replacing it with a new understanding. Success is not measured by vanquishing one's enemies, but by forgiving them. Jesus even died with forgiveness on his lips, forgiveness for those who had failed him in every way. The delinquent disciples, the crowd shouting for his death, even the soldiers with their spears. And after the horror of that day, he would rise again and find his followers, and he would even take Peter aside to offer him fish and forgiveness and a future. He trusted Peter to carry the movement forward, knowing that he would continue to fail, and often, but he also knew that Peter would fail better every time, as would all the followers. It would be, and has been to date, a nearly 2,000-year story of failures. But with God's grace, we keep learning how to fail better, trying new things, taking some risks, forgiving ourselves and others along the way. And this is why we continue to tell the story of the empty tomb. Because no matter how many times we fail, Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. And that gives us hope to continue following him. For Jesus' faithful followers, then and now, the real joy of the Easter message is not that finally everything is perfect, but that it isn't, and that's all right. The true beauty of Easter lies not in our shunning perfection, but in our honesty about our own flaws. I remember an Easter Sunday many years ago when my daughter was 17 months old. It was a perfect Easter Sunday. The weather was marvelous, the church was gorgeous, the music was spectacular, and the pews were packed with people dressed in their finest attire. There were maybe 300 people there that day, and I just knew that our little family of 3 had the potential to ruin Easter worship for every single one of those fine folks. You see, a 17-month-old human is adorable but volatile. You just never know what's going to happen. We were prepared. We had crayons, we had stickers, we had quiet snacks, we had anxiety. We also had friends sitting in the pew right behind us, people we were just getting to know, and they had 2 little girls older than ours, and I was really jealous because I just knew that those darling little girls with their Easter frocks and curled hair, they were the shining examples of what children in church were supposed to be, which made me feel all the more self-conscious about my potential humiliation if my own kid acted up. Their children, I could tell, would not. And they didn't. They sat there quiet as church mice, gently stroking my hair, which at that time I wore in a long braid that fell to my waist. What sweet little children, so tender and affectionate. My own child spent a lot of time staring at those kids, which was a relief. Maybe they would set an example for her of how to remain quiet. Finally, at long last, the closing hymn was played, a triumph on the organ, the alleluias soaring from the choir to the angels themselves, and I sang my heart out too because, hallelujah, we had lasted the whole time without ruining Easter. And as we were gathering up our snacks and our crayons, the couple on the pew behind us leaned in to whisper, "Thank you," they said. "You saved us. We were so worried about our girls getting fidgety during church, but they were mesmerized by your braid. They just counted the links over and over again." And that's when it hit me. These people whom I thought had it all together, the picture-perfect family, they had the same real-life concerns I had. They also thought their kids might ruin Easter. What a gift to see them as they truly were, just as human as anyone else. They became our true friends that day because they were real. Before leaving church that day, I looked one last time at the cross in front of the sanctuary, which we had covered with flowers at the beginning of worship. It was beautiful, just awash in, camellias, lilacs, and irises, wisteria, daffodils, all the flowers of early spring that people had gathered from their gardens. That cross looked and smelled like heaven. It was perfect. But I also knew that underneath the flowers, that cross was made of simple wood covered in chicken wire. Chicken wire. You tell me, is there anything less glamorous than chicken wire? If the assignment was to make a cross that could be used in worship on Easter and someone showed up with a monstrosity of chicken wire, that one would easily get a failing grade. But as followers of Jesus, we know that the goal is not perfection, but redemption. Those flowers redeemed that chicken wire cross, which became even more beautiful than the expensive, shiny one on the altar. Of course, the flowers would fade and wither in just a few days, just as our own Easter glow of holiness and spotless perfection would disappear, likely the minute the kids hit the lawn looking for Easter eggs. Grass would stain new outfits, parents would slowly lose their measured composure, and we'd all go back to our old selves, more or less. But we'd keep coming back, Sunday after Sunday or Easter after Easter, working on it, learning to accept ourselves and each other despite our foibles and failures. Friends, that is the good news of Easter. There is just no failure too big for God to work with. I mean, if God can work with a Roman cross, then God can work with us, all of us. Happy Easter to you.